Let's talk about the history of the word queer and why I use it the way that I do. Welcome back to Yesterqueers. My name's Amanda, and I'm a public historian of queer history. If you're a longtime follower, you've heard me talk about this before, but it's been a couple of years since I made a video, and I still get comments about my use of the word queer all the time, so it seemed like a good idea to revisit the topic. The word queer is a noun, a verb, and an adjective with origins stretching all the way back to the 14th century, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, which is basically the gold standard for tracking the history of the English language. Queer first appears around 1390 as a verb meaning to question or investigate. As an adjective, it first appears in the 16th century, meaning odd or eccentric. We first see it in 1513-ish in the Flyting of Dunbar and Kennedy. Flyting was basically a 16th century Scottish rap battle. Poets would try to outdo each other in a war of words, and the audience would choose the victor. For the next almost 400 years, queer continues to be used to describe things that are strange or excessive, aberrant, over the top, untrustworthy. It's a word that is used to describe deviance. Queer becomes associated with sex workers and with counterfeit money, and it's used to describe that vague feeling of being unwell and the feeling of being drunk. But queer is not weaponized as a slur against gay and bisexual men until 1895, during Oscar Wilde's criminal trial for indecency. In a letter that was read aloud in court, the Marquis of Queensberry expressed disgust over Wilde's relationship with his son, Lord Alfred Douglas, and he described Wilde and his contemporaries as snob queers. Contrary to popular belief, that moment did not lead to 160 plus years of queer being used only as a slur until activists reclaimed it at the end of the 20th century. In fact, the word queer has been used as an affirming identifier in group and as a slur by those out of the group since at least the early 1900s. In a series of articles about Long Beach, California's social vagrant investigations in 1914, the Sacramento Bee quoted men referring to themselves and their social groups as queer, and also used queer as a derogatory descriptor, sometimes in the same article. This letter, which was discovered following a raid on London's Caravan Club in August of 1934, is written by a man named Cyril Coeur de Lion, and in it he uses the word queer to describe his sexuality. It is absolutely true that the word queer was, and sometimes still is, hurled at primarily gay and bisexual men to belittle and degrade them, and that can cause real harm. But it is also true that parts of our community have drawn power from identifying themselves as queer for at least a century. Activists who were radicalized by the AIDS crisis tapped into that power in the late 1980s when they started using the word to gather together what was at the time a very fractious community under the banner of queer. It was a rejection of liberal conservatism and of the Christian nationalism that was just starting to take hold in our government. But it was also an embrace of the revolutionary act of simply existing as an LGBTQ+ person. In June of 1990, an anonymous pamphlet called Queers Read This was distributed at the New York City Pride Parade. It begins, "How can I tell you? How can I convince you, brother, sister, that your life is in danger? That every day you wake up alive, relatively happy, and a functioning human being, you are committing a rebellious act. You, as an alive and functioning queer, are revolutionary." As queer became a political identity challenging mainstream views on gender and sexuality, academics began using the word queer and the idea of queerness to disrupt the heteronormative binary understandings of power and broaden their focus to include the intersection of sexuality, gender, race, and class. When we use queer as a verb now, we're analyzing or interpreting something from a queer perspective or through the lens of queer theory, investigating whether we can make something more accessible and relevant to people who have diverse gender and sexual identities. And today, the adjective queer is most often used as an affirming, inclusive umbrella term for the entire community. I use it that way, but I also use it to describe the genders and sexualities of people in the past whose lived experiences don't quite line up with our modern understanding of those things. That's what I mean when I say we have always been here and we have always been queer. I love the word queer. In my very long journey to understanding and embracing my sexuality, queer is the first word that really felt like home, because it describes both my sexuality and my worldview. For many people, myself included, queer has never lost its political connotations. But for others, it has never lost the bite of being used as an insult, and that's okay. Both of those things can coexist. I'm Gen X, so I do understand why so many people struggle to embrace a word that was once hurled at us as a slur, but it's worth remembering that almost all of the words that LGBTQIA plus people use to describe ourselves now are reclaimed slurs or archaic clinical terms. As Australian historian Dr. Timothy Jones points out, liberating words from non-affirming religious, clinical, or colloquial contexts and giving them our own meanings is one of the defining characteristics of LGBTQIA plus history. That's it for today. As always, more information, including sources and further reading, is available in the usual place.